Welcome to Vaguely Scientific, the podcast that critics say is wildly better than Garbled Static.
I hope.
I don't know. I saw Garbled Static live back at the Green in 92, and they were pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I ever get back because I am Derek. And now, stepping up to the plate, the Sultan of Science, the behemoth of Bunsen burners, the great Jim Bino. Hi, Jim.
I'm the Steve Jeltz of baseball.
Steve Jeltz of baseball?
Yeah.
And we have a brand new guest on today's episode. Please welcome, let me see if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Jeremiah?
Yeah, it's Jeremiah, guys. I've been here several times. I'm the one who cut out the door that we came through to get here. It's canon.
We have a door?
You have a door now because I cut last time I was here.
You are saying a lot of things. I don't know.
It's fine.
I thought that we hired a contractor to do that.
I mean, somebody did.
Yeah. I wasn't here when it happened.
No, you only 1099'd me later.
Well, for those of you who don't know, including Jeremiah, this is a show where we answer the most outrageous audience-submitted questions in a manner that we like to call vaguely scientific. But before we do that, we have to get through Jim's fun science fact of the day. Jim?
Wow, okay. Then.
I didn't mean that to sound as rude as it was.
Really? Because you succeeded.
Well, this fun science fact is, I think it's really neat. It's about the first synthetic plastic, which was called Bakelite. And Bakelite is very easy to mold, and it hardened fairly easily as well. And so before long, it found its way into the consumer market pretty rapidly. So you see things like old radios and old telephones made out of this Bakelite stuff. And it has a really neat appearance. It's hard to describe. You'd have to go look up some pictures, but it's got a really fun resiny appearance. I think, as far as I understand, collectors really go and seek it out because it's something that has that sort of nostalgia for the 30s and 40s and 50s.
It's weird to me that it's called Bakelite because the first thing I thought of was cookware or oven pans or something.
Yeah.
If you put plastic in the oven, it's not going to work out for you.
Right. It's actually named after the guy who invented it, and I probably
Unless it's a shrinky dink.
made a note of this.
It's like a shrinky dink.
Name of guy who invented Bakelite, Leo Baekeland. That's
Leo
why.
Baekeland.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Oh, I didn't expect that to be... I expected Bakelite to just be this is a process of how it's made, as opposed to it being the guy's name. That's very interesting.
Baekeland, and it's Bakelite named after Bake. That's weird.
Yeah.
Maybe he made a version of it beforehand that was too heavy.
Yeah, that would be my guess.
I want to jump back to something Jeremiah said because it would serve as a really good segue for me.
Sweet.
If you put plastic in the oven, it's like shrinky dinks, right? Because question 1 this week is, could a shrink ray work? See that? That was so smooth.
That's a segue.
I saw it a mile away. As a returning guest to this podcast, I saw that coming.
If you were on this podcast before, then you'd know our names.
I just said
Jim
our
and
names.
Derek.
Yeah, I just said them right now.
Oh, well, yeah, then sure. Name 5 songs that we wrote.
So question 1 this week. Could a shrink ray work? No.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's actually what I wrote in my notes. I basically wrote no, it couldn't, but let's just go nuts and try to find ways to make it happen.
All right, moving on.
Moving on.
We gotta go nuts. We have to.
We're under contract.
Some of the research that I did, I think the problem is also just the phrase shrink ray, because depending on which way that you were trying to accomplish this, you would have it wouldn't necessarily be true shrinking. Classically, for example, in like the Marvel Ant-Man series and stuff like that, what they're doing is they're basically compressing. It's like a compressing ray because you still have your same mass or whatever. It's not that you're necessarily smaller. It's just removing the space in between your atoms.
That makes sense. Yeah.
I actually have Ant-Man, and that is the same explanation often given in The Atom, which is like the DC version of Ant-Man.
Yeah.
Is that they remove the space in between atoms, so they're not actually making the atoms smaller, which I take umbrage with because then you couldn't go into a subatomic realm.
Oh, good point.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting that you brought that up because I was looking at a bunch of different science fiction shrinking stories, and that explanation from Ant-Man is kind of like the most fleshed out scientific explanation that we see anywhere in fiction.
Only probably because one person came up with that idea back in the 60s, and then we had to commit to about 70 years worth of justifying it and looking into how that could be possible.
Yeah. But on that note, I learned, I didn't actually know this before, but Isaac Asimov actually wrote the novelization version of the movie The Fantastic Voyage.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So he wrote in the foreword, rather than shrink ray, it's not specifically a shrink ray, but they use the term miniaturization. And he wrote, miniaturization doesn't actually make sense unless you miniaturize the very atoms which build up matter. Otherwise, a tiny brain in a human the size of an insect, composed of normal atoms, is composed of too few atoms for the miniaturized human to be any more intelligent than the insect.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Also, miniaturizing atoms is impossible according to the rules of quantum mechanics.
That was actually something I wanted to bring up with this particularly, because the idea that you can remove the space between atoms is also, well, it's impossible for a lot of reasons, but the one that I really wanted to hyperfixate on for this particular example is that there is the weak nuclear force and the strong nuclear force, and there's a whole host of other forces that keep atoms basically stable. And if those forces get thrown out of balance, then what you've done is created a nuclear reaction. Whether it's fusion or fission doesn't really matter, because either way, you're going to turn into plasma. So
that's terrifying.
That's good to keep in mind, I suppose.
Yeah, if you put your atoms too close together, they will either fly apart and create a chain reaction, or they will turn into one large atom. And either one of those outcomes is bad for you or anything you're miniaturizing.
Well, in that same concept, I think part of the issue isn't necessarily, it's like the magic trick thing. It's not that you're shrinking it. You have to be able to then unshrink it and bring it back. And that's what a lot of this, the researching into it, compressing and then uncompressing in the Ant-Man way makes sense, because then you can story-wise have them come back or get bigger. Which never quite made sense, because it's, oh, look how strong he is because he's small. It's because he's compressed. And then he gets big, and it's, well, now there's more space in between your atoms, and look how strong he is because he's large.
Right. So like Giant Man should be like real easy to take down.
Yeah, basically.
Kick him and he turns into powder.
But there's the thing that I found too, which was, I think, maybe the first option that popped up whenever I Googled this, was that I think the Quora website, which usually has interesting things, and this one I was like, I don't know about this. Their point was a shrink ray strips neutrinos and mass from the individual atoms, and so it basically leaves the atoms somehow. The suggestion that this was giving was that it leaves behind the essential atoms that you need in order to create a thing, but will strip away its mass and completely blow it through. So it's almost like, in the same way that radiation waves or particles would go through you, this ray would be essentially just shotgunning away mass over and over and over again until all the excess was gone, and then the thing was smaller. You could not reclaim that mass back. Now it's just small. It's just...
Yeah,
it just
that would require
is the thing.
some sort of rebigulator, which is a concept so ridiculous it makes me want to laugh out loud. That's from The Simpsons. I had to include it.
I've gone through a rebigulator before, but I think it's only because it was the number 5 option at Wendy's.
That's good. I wanted to go back to the quote I read just briefly, because I wanted to make the point that Isaac Asimov actually didn't want to write the novelization of Fantastic Voyage because he felt that the shrinking was just too unscientific, which it is. But his ultimate reason for agreeing to do it was because while
Money.
that...
Sorry.
the thing he went on record of claiming is his actual reason for doing it was because the exploration of the human body was kind of the focus of that story. And so the shrinking was he felt it was an acceptable deviation from realistic, which, I mean, this is all science fiction is not realistic, and people who want it to be too scientific or you get over it. I don't know. But that was interesting to me because I looked at a couple different stories, like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids is one of them, and Fantastic Voyage is another one. And these are things that, like, the point of the story, The Incredible Shrinking Man is another one that I looked up, where in that one it's like some kind of accidental radiation exposure that makes him shrink. And these are explorations of the psychology behind what it would be like to be super small. And Honey, I Shrunk the Kids is kind of about the spectacle of having this environment that you get to put on film. So it's really just a means to an end to explore something else in those situations.
That makes sense, yeah.
In those sorts of stories, there's a storytelling rule or technique that's... if I remember correctly, the phrase is you're allowed one miracle.
Okay, yeah.
And that's it.
And that's the one you build your movie or show around.
Yeah, everything else can be, it doesn't matter. You have Scooby-Doo, Scooby-Doo is just a talking dog. Nobody ever pays attention to the fact that it's a talking dog, but you go through and you painstakingly explain this is how they were faking the ghost. Here's all of this and stuff like that. While they also have this one miracle with them.
Yeah.
Same with some other things. Like you can go through with, let's say, Batman and be like, here's all of his gadgets. Here's exactly what it takes. Here's all the things that he's building. You just have to accept the miracle that this dude is building it all himself without anyone noticing it underneath his house.
Right.
I thought that you were going to say the one miracle was the bat shark repellent.
No, that's science. That's real.
That's not a miracle. We have that.
When's the last time you saw a bat shark?
That's fair. You know what? I haven't.
So the only other example I could really think of things shrinking in media, and this is important to mention because I was thinking of Alice in Wonderland.
Oh, yeah.
And I just wanted to use that as the only real example I bring up of like fantasy and magic. It can be accomplished.
I'm so mad that I didn't. I'm literally working at an Alice in Wonderland themed experience right now. And not for a moment did I think, oh yeah, Alice in Wonderland, the thing I've been doing for the past month and a half.
You're too close to it. It happens.
Yeah. Well, it shrunk. It was too easy to get past.
One of the ones that I saw that was in media that I thought was kind of interesting is something from Doctor Who. The Master, which is, he's like an evil Time Lord that is, always antagonizing the Doctor in some capacity, has this gizmo called the Tissue Compression Eliminator. And the method by which it works seems to vary from source to source, but the idea is that it compresses all your tissues and it turns you into a little like doll or like a little action figure sized thing. The big difference between what we've talked about so far and the tissue compression eliminator is that it does kill you.
Yeah, it's intentionally built to kill you. It's funny you should bring this up because that's specifically one of the other things that I thought about whenever it came to, shrinking you'd have to compress it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I immediately rejected it just because I assumed the objective would be you'd want it to come back. Like I said with the magic trick thing earlier. And I've been rewatching a lot of Doctor Who recently. And that is very much the thing of like, oh, look at what I did. And you're like, oh, that's amazing. He's like, oh, yeah, this killed them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do have one. I agree with Jeremiah. The point was to like keep things intact but smaller.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they're intact. They just don't have their life anymore.
Oh, okay.
They're just very small and dead.
I did make a note here, though, that I appreciate in the first Ant-Man movie, the bad guy's weapon is a shrink gun that just like, compresses people into goop. Yeah, like.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of my favorite villain kills or ways that a villain has killed someone in a movie is whenever he shoots that guy with the shrink ray in the bathroom and then just wipes him up with a piece of toilet paper and flushes him away. It's so disrespectful. It's excellent.
Here's my last note. Is another example of a shrink ray in fiction that is possibly slightly more realistic. You'll see. In the movie Mystery Men, an inventor creates a shrink ray that does not shrink people, but it shrinks fabric. So when they use it on people, it constricts their clothing and causes them to be immobile for, reasons that are less practical. But that could work.
I do like the idea of it being, that's a good point. I mean, everything that we're kind of discussing here is around the idea of shrinking or compressing organic living material, but it is kind of a fun idea to be like, oh, you know what? It kind of doesn't really matter if you're just trying to shrink a rock or somebody's clothes around them, if it's something that isn't alive.
It'd be really handy for space travel if you shrank all of your cargo, and presumably in the hypothetical, you also have the ability to remove its mass. And then if you can remassify it at the other end, then it saves you in a lot of rocket fuel. That's for sure.
That's true. For transportation. Well, then we dehydrate food, right? Yeah.
That was another one I actually wanted to bring up because it's not a shrink ray, but like if you suck all of the water out of something, it does get smaller. I mean, this is true of food. It's true of humans. Look at a mummy. They are not full size. They're as long as they typically are, but they are not as thick, round.
Happy birthday, Jeremiah, if you're listening. Yeah, I do have some space saver bags that I used to use that were just, you threw your clothes into it and there was a valve and I would just suck the air out of it.
Right, the vacuum bags.
But yeah, it's just, that's another thing of removing what's in between the atoms, which is other atoms.
Yeah.
See, it makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, when you just have random air you can get rid of, or random water you can get rid of. I mean, you're not going to, again, like the tissue compression eliminator, if you mummify someone, they're going to be dead. But they will be smaller.
Well, as we all learned in the Dark Ages, air is just the space between stuff.
And one last thing I was thinking about was that if you were able to not actually shrink something down physically, but if you were to somehow warp space, and there would have to be a very delicate balance to this, because I feel like this is bordering on creating a black hole. But if you could like compress the space around someone, kind of like a warp drive in Star Trek, then, I mean, they would maybe theoretically be smaller. They wouldn't be smaller in their own space. They would be the same size in that space. It's just you're compressing actual space around them so that they take up less space in the grander universe of things. So again, might collapse into a black hole. I haven't looked into the physics of this because I know it's impossible, but it's something I wanted to bring up.
Well, then you're kind of talking about pocket dimensions.
Sure.
Right.
Hey, there you go. Fit someone in your pocket. It's a pocket dimension.
Somebody who might or might not already be dead.
I know that Master tucked somebody in his pocket that was dead.
He did.
That was rude.
Well, he's dead. Doesn't matter now.
I refer to my last statement.
So yeah, we're actually going to go ahead and move on to our intermission segment for this week, which is one of my favorites, returning from a very long hiatus, the Wrestling Research Federation.
Cut my music. Cut my music.
No, we already did that joke.
Oh, okay. I don't know what this is.
You would have known that if he had been on the show before.
Yeah, if you had ever been on the show before, the one time that we did this already. But yeah, this is actually something that I found very fascinating, so I decided that I wanted to look into it, and I was kind of surprised by what I found out. Today, I wanted to take a look at how a wrestling ring is constructed.
It's kind of hard to tell what they actually use, because the entire thing is covered in padding and logos.
Yeah.
Marketing and stuff.
I was surprised when I found out that the frame is actually steel.
I mean, it makes sense. It needs to be able to hold up its own weight and the weight of the wrestlers and chairs and tables.
Yeah, that's true.
Not to mention impacts, the amount of movements and everything it has to deal with.
Yeah. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting is that the underlying material of the ring itself is actually wood. So the way that the ring itself is constructed is that there's the wood layer, there's a layer of padding, and then they stretch a canvas out over the top.
So it seems like a lot of people think that the ring is more like a trampoline, but if you watch the wrestlers jumping, you'll see they don't really catch that much air at all. Plus, the wood beneath helps to make some of the moves sound louder when they hit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of bouncing around, I was really surprised to learn that the ropes around the ring are actually ropes.
A lot of people think those are like big rubber bands. I thought they were big rubber bands, but apparently they're not big rubber bands.
Yeah. No, it varies by company, as in to say the various promotions. But the two main ones that I found are ropes, actual ropes that are wrapped in cloth. And then the other one that I found was steel cables that are inside of a rubber hose.
Yeah, so the wrestling ring itself is not actually gimmicked to keep people from getting hurt.
Right. Yeah. Just like we talked about the last time I did this segment, the only thing that's keeping the wrestlers safe are the wrestlers themselves.
And even then, sometimes.
Yeah. No, there have been quite a few injuries this year, as a matter of fact. So
yeah, some real big old fun ones.
Yeah. Yeah. It's remarkable that you see people bouncing around, well, not bouncing, but like you see them running and jumping and doing all these flips and things. And it's not that the ring itself is springy or jumpy. They're just good at jumping and flipping and stuff.
They're just good at jumping. Yeah.
They just do their job goodly.
What's that you said? It's re-marking out?
I understood that reference.
I didn't. I just laughed along.
Fair.
I don't actually watch wrestling.
No, you experience it.
You experience wrestling.
You live the wrestling.
Which I didn't sign up for, so they owe me a lot of money in damages.
Oh, well, good news. They owe a lot of people a lot of money about damages.
I don't know if that's good news.
There's certainly a lot of news coming out of the WWE. I'll say that.
So why don't we...
none of it good.
Why don't we move on to a lighter topic, debatably, with question 2, which comes to us from Addison. Would a human body decompose if left in the vacuum of space? And if so, would it be faster or slower than if it was in, the atmosphere?
Well, if you drop a body from space into the atmosphere, it's going to decompose real fast.
It's going to burn up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And disintegrate.
Yeah. Is that the same? Is decomposition the same as disintegration?
No, I guess not.
Well, because you're still pretty integrated as you're decomposing.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah, you're not on fire, so...
Well, you could be.
That's true. Well, no.
We had mentioned earlier about mummies being...
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. The whole thing with the shrink ray was that, okay, well, haha, if we're shrinking mummies, we're removing the liquid. Well, depending on if you're... I'm just going to say for the sake of my bit, and then I'm sure that the rest of you also have things to come in that have the other ways that this could go. If your body is just exposed in space, you're just limbs floating around in the endless void of nothing, and you don't have a suit on. Let's just say you're a naked corpse floating through space. Depending on your proximity to a source of warmth, it could mummify you. As long as, because you'd be exposed directly towards the heat from either a sun or something like that. There's no air buffer, of course, to stop that.
Yeah.
Depending on where you were whenever the body hits space, it's either going to freeze pretty quickly or it's going to dry out. But it wouldn't necessarily burn, because the problem is that there's no oxygen. So it would just boil out the water that's essentially in there and dry you up, but nothing would ever really burn or split in that way.
Right.
I was curious about the thing I've seen in movies such as Total Recall. The idea that once you are exposed to a vacuum, the pressure inside your body is too great, and it's always depicted as people are going to like burst. So I the first thing I looked up, I was pretty sure the answer was no, but I just wanted to see if we ever had a human body in space that we've observed, and we haven't. But I was curious as to like just that transition from getting into the vacuum of space. Would we be able to get an intact body to like be there? And I just don't know. Maybe we can.
That is also a Simpsons gag.
Yep.
Yeah.
James Bond ejected a guy into space.
Did he blow up?
No,
James Bond was fine.
Oh, okay, good. Good.
Yeah, I mean that's all correct. And one of the things that I think is kind of neat about it is just that in the absence of really any kind of oxygen, it's really going to slow things down. And in theory, however, if you brought that person back down to Earth, doesn't have to be a person, I guess it could be any dead creature, but then you bring them back down to Earth, and then they could be decomposed by things that are on our planet. So you could like freeze dry them out in space and then bring them back down here and let nature take its course.
Yeah, because decomposition generally happens with like microbes and stuff and bacteria and stuff eating away at organic matter, which requires oxygen.
Although speaking of freeze drying, which I used incorrectly because Jeremiah was talking about like heating something up to remove all the moisture. But if you chuck a person out past like Jupiter, Saturn, that kind of area, then you will become very cold and you will become frozen. And the water will stay in you, but you will turn into an ice. Did you ever see that episode of the Magic School Bus where they go to Pluto and Arnold takes his helmet off and his head
just to make a point?
Yeah.
Wait, I don't remember that. He took his helmet off?
Yeah,
he does. He was like, fine, if we're not going anywhere, then what's the point? And he just takes off his helmet and his head freezes.
I don't remember that.
He surely should be dead.
That's terrifying.
But yeah, his head just turns into ice. Like he freezes. Oh, it's horrifying. As a child, I was terrified of this.
X-Men. It's crazy.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, that would happen to you. It wouldn't happen that fast. You would freeze over the course of a few minutes. But the thing is that then at that point, you would actually suffer from freezer burn, I believe would be sort of the correct way of describing it, because all your cells would burst pretty much. And so they thaw you out and you just turn into sludge. So not great.
Well, what they even did in the Magic School Bus, which I always thought was funny, is they thaw him back out, and then he just has a cold. Like, they just give him some soup and they wrap him in a blanket and he sneezes.
You wouldn't even get a cold. There's no germs on Pluto.
That show always ended with, like, the whole idea of a viewer calling in the writer and pointing out the problems. Like, that better have been something they meant. Like, how is Arnold not dead?
I forget what they pointed out at the end. I do remember that they mentioned that at the time the episode came out, Pluto was not the last planet, back when Pluto was a planet, because at certain points in its orbit, Pluto is closer to the sun than Neptune is. Right. So they did point that out, because they said Pluto is the 9th planet, but actually at the time it was closer, up till 1999, I think.
Interesting.
I like the idea of the episodes ending with, hey, some of you are going to notice that there are some inaccuracies in this episode, and you are correct. Why are we the only source of knowledge that you are expecting from? This is a children's television show. We have to be entertaining at some point. Mm-hmm. Go watch Cosmos. It's 2 channels up.
It's not as fun, though.
I mean, the original I don't know. I was a weird kid. I thought it was pretty fun.
So in addition to looking up whether or not we had ever seen evidence of a human body out in space, I just looked up if we had ever seen just any animals, like any like deceased animals that maybe they did testing on. And from what I found, we haven't, because every animal that's ever been sent into space was alive. But so I say animals because I'm about to contradict myself right now. Because apparently there have been things called biosatellite programs in which they released organic materials, and usually it was like cellular type stuff, but I found spurious claims that they may have included some like dead insects to see what would happen to them if they released them into space. And so I thought that was interesting. That was like back in the 60s.
That is interesting. Huh.
Do we know what happened to these dead insects? Or?
From what I could find, if you look up biosatellite program on Wikipedia.
And I will not.
Okay. It's like too much technical information, and I just wanted a concise answer. But the most I could find was they just kind of looked at what single-celled organisms would do in microgravity. And that's like the most of what they studied. And that was pretty much just they would, they took up the least resistant path, so mostly they became spheres.
I like the idea of any sort of scientific experiment where they put a lot of work and time into it, and the response that they get at the end of it is, that's weird.
Well, that's we cite a lot of those.
Yeah.
That was weird. Anyway, moving on.
Actually, that reminds me of tardigrades and how they are
yes,
very hard to kill.
Wait, what about that reminds you of how hard they are to kill, and why?
Because they sent those in space too, right?
Okay. Yeah, they've brought them up to the space station. They put them out into the vacuum of space. And they bring them back in and they revive them. It's kind of wild, but that reminds me of the tardigrade for somewhat related reasons. I think that one of the things I found that was kind of interesting and kind of wild is that after a very, very long time, eventually the body would break down. It wouldn't be like decomposition. It would be basically like cosmic rays would sort of break your body down. And the thing is that I think is really cool about that is that it would take an incredible period of time, like talking millions, maybe up to 1 billion years. But I think it's cool because apparently the same thing is going to eventually happen to Voyager out in interstellar space. Like over the course of like the next billion and some years, cosmic rays is slowly going to pick away at the Voyager space probes until there's nothing left. And I just think that's kind of cool.
But that really ruins my dream of the Fantastic Four being a documentary.
Yeah.
I don't understand this reference.
Well, they got their powers from cosmic radiation.
Cosmic rays.
Oh, well, yeah, but they didn't spend like 1 billion years out in the cosmic rays. They were there for like...
No, they dipped in and out, and they
Yeah.
came back with some stretchy bits.
So that's the trick, is you don't want to spend 1 million years out there. You
Right.
just want to dip in and get your superpowers and come home.
Right, yeah. You know, the poison is the dose, not the... So, yeah, you could hang out in space for a while. You know, you got to watch, though, because like you hang out in space for the wrong amount of time and you don't get any superpowers at all. You just get like weak muscles and bones. So...
Well, so that kind of is an interesting answer to like just the original phrasing of the question, because it sounds like, would a human body decompose? No. But then it would eventually break down, but it would be significantly slower than decomposition.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah. Because, I mean, strictly speaking, decomposition is like other organisms break you down and they eat you basically and what have you. So technically that wouldn't occur anywhere really in space. But, you know, eventually that body's going away one way or the other.
Right.
It's just going to take a tremendously long period of time.
You wouldn't be preserved forever.
Right. Yeah. Although if you ended up somewhere where it like maybe could shield you from some of that, I mean, I didn't think much about this, but I suppose if you were like buried on the moon, as long as the moon stays like a vacuum, basically, I don't know that there's much that would really happen to you if you were, you know, a few feet down in the ground.
Okay, completely unrelated, but also related to what you just said. As far as being buried on the moon, how hard would it be to dig a grave and then bury somebody on the moon with that low gravity? I'm just now aware of the idea of how difficult it would be to just do a straight up dig a hole and put it into a pile, put something in, and then dig the dirt back onto it. I mean, that would just go everywhere.
I was thinking, because I mean, I don't think that the surface of the moon is particularly easy to just dig into. I think you got to like pickaxe it. So like, I imagine an astronaut swinging down with their pickaxe and it hits the ground and then they just go up. It's like an equal and opposite reaction.
Right. Yeah. I want to bring a backhoe to the moon. That would be fun. Drive it around.
Yeah.
Do flips and stuff.
That would be fun, yeah. Like hit the edge of a crater with your backhoe and just go up.
What was the thing we've talked about before? I think it was when we were talking about catapulting things into the sun. Where was it that you said like it wouldn't take a whole lot of force to like launch something out of the gravitational pull? That wasn't the moon, was it?
I mean, yeah, the moon, because the gravity is about 1/6 of that of Earth. And one of the things that I think we should do everywhere, doesn't have to be on the moon, but we should start building mass drivers so that we can launch things more efficiently with magnetic rail cannons and stuff. Here's the thing. You put a body onto a mass driver, and that body now becomes a ballistic projectile that is going somewhere. You could launch it towards Saturn. You could launch it towards Alpha Centauri. Doesn't matter. It's going to get there someday because it's going to be going like, I don't know. I can't throw out a real number. I'm just going to say 11 kilometers a second because that's how fast the New Horizons space probe is going.
I mean, they used to launch like plague-ridden bodies out of catapults. So, like, there's precedent for that.
That's true. Biological warfare back then.
I'm not saying to do that. I'm not saying to spread diseases. I'm saying to just, like, put them... Like, it's so poetic. Like, I want someone to launch my body out of the solar system. I don't make nearly enough money for that to happen. I don't know if I make enough money to be put in a pine box in the ground. They might just have to blow me up.
Yeah, take that, Mars.
Yeah.
Before we even colonize, we'll bring the diseases first.
Yeah.
I just foresee, this is like a Ray Bradbury idea, I think, but like we've normalized launching our dead into space to like keep them from taking up space on Earth or something. And thousands of years in the future, they all arrive on another planet and it's taken as an act of war.
I mean... Fair.
This
I
is a
wouldn't be
threat.
thrilled.
Look what we did to these people.
I
Yeah,
still
right.
want to know why in Mars Attacks they had the problem with the dove. Like, what was it specifically?
My headcanon for that has always been that on Mars there's like some kind of dangerous carnivorous bird that is used as a weapon. I don't know. That was as far as my headcanon ever went on that one. Their heads explode when they listen to music, so I mean, it could be anything.
The only
That's
thing
true.
I remember about that movie is that Tom Jones is in it.
Yeah.
So is Pierce Brosnan.
I haven't seen that movie in
So is Ving
so
Rhames. So is Jack Nicholson. Is like 3 people. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter.
Those are all things I didn't remember because those people aren't Tom Jones.
They're all people that have careers.
Well, it's not unusual.
Yeah, but what's new? Pussycat?
Don't call me pet names.
You know what I always thought would be fun to do with a body?
What would be fun to do with the body?
We might have to stop recording, but go on.
I always thought it'd be interesting, like if you reach a point where it is more worthwhile to put the body elsewhere. Like, I don't know why you would need to do this, because like I guess that there's like concerns about cemeteries filling up and this and that and the other thing, but like if you need it, like I don't think we're running out of cemetery space, like in a very literal sense. Like we have the entire Australian outback, right? So
Oh no.
Oh, why are we back on Australia?
I don't know. Anyway, let me get to the point of my thought here.
Go ahead.
So I always thought it'd be neat to send a body to like a gas giant. And I think it's just to me, I think one of the most amazing things we ever did was crash satellites into Jupiter and Saturn. And that sounds like a bit, and it sounds very silly, but like we as a species built a thing that then went to a whole other planet and now is part of that planet. Like it is the atoms from the thing from Earth are now in Jupiter and Saturn. And that's so cool. Like I want them to put me in Jupiter when I die. I want to be part of Jupiter, man. That'd be the best.
Be part of Jupiter. Okay.
I think it's super poetic and cool, and it's just a testament to how amazing humans can be, that we can put things from one planet onto another planet, and they become part of that planet.
Humans have an incredible desire to just throw our trash somewhere else.
You'd be a human on Jupiter in the ground dead.
Yeah.
That's
the episode.
That's an obscure reference.
I kept thinking about that this whole time. I don't even remember what the content of that episode was, but I do remember the title.
It was colonizing Mars. We were talking about colonizing Mars.
Makes sense. But yeah, I mean, and the thing about sending things to like Jupiter or Saturn or the sun is that it's not something that's going to stay there. Like it's, you know, you send a human body into Jupiter and the pressure and the temperature, it's going to turn you into plasma. You are not going to decompose. You are just going to become part of the mist that makes up Jupiter. And I think that's just kind of cool.
Or very hot.
Yeah. If you are buried on Mars, you will just be a human on Mars in the ground dead, like the episode title. But on Jupiter, you become part of Jupiter, and that is cool.
Well, I mean, humans ultimately become part of Earth after they've decomposed.
Sure, but not Mars. At least not in the near term. Like if we ever terraformed Mars, then maybe. But Moon and Mars right now, you just stay there until you are until we fix that.
Until we just stay there until we fix it. That's a tomorrow problem.
I always thought it was kind of interesting to think about people living on the moon specifically, because I do feel like eventually there's going to be an attempt made to terraform Mars, you know, and like,
or at least have some sort of permanent colony.
Yeah. But like, and I mean, like, we'll probably build like a permanent base on the moon in some capacity, but the moon it doesn't have, well, I can't just flat out say it doesn't have an environment, because that's not the definition of how environments are. Like clearly there's an environment, but there's no
it's
air.
It's just not what we're super comfortable with.
Was it doesn't have an ecosystem? Is that?
That's
Ecosystem.
Yeah.
That's good.
Whereas like Mars, if we warmed it up a little bit, if we, brought a little bit more water into the system, then it would have some kind of ecosystem where eventually, imported bacteria and fungi could probably break down a body. But the moon, we can't really terraform the moon, at least not in, the few thousand years that we could probably do it with Mars. So I feel like if you throw a human out just like on the ground, it's just going to, bake away in the sun until all of the atoms just sort of evaporate, however long that ends up taking.
I feel like every species we bring to Mars is an invasive species.
Oh, yeah. All of them.
We are the real invasive species.
I too saw The Matrix.
So my favorite band of all time is Gorillaz. This is related. But
Okay.
one of my favorite songs that they do is from the Demon Days album, and it's called Every Planet We Reach Is Dead. And it's supposed to be an evocative thing of, every relationship that the character who's singing it has been has not yielded any sort of fruit. It's like every planet that we go, and it's like, oh, this is just more barren rock and I can't live here. But there, for a period of time, when it first came out, when I was like 14 years old, I read that title. I was like, you're right. Every planet we reach is dead. This is such philosophy. What facts? But it's no. I do have one thing actually, because I just thought of this. The absence of there being an environment without there being anything to break down, even if you did go through the trouble of digging a hole and burying somebody on the moon, if it was sufficiently covered, other than it just being frozen, would be curious to know what would happen to the body that was in there. At least, at least if you bury somebody in the real world, maybe the casket will eventually degrade and all those different things. But essentially, what you would be doing is just shoving this body into like a rock freezer or like one of those old Earth cellars or whatever.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to think about how much bacteria in your body could do before your body basically becomes uninhabitable to them. Because a lot of your gut bacteria will start to break things down a little bit. And eventually, if you're on the moon or anywhere else, really, it's either going to be too hot or too cold for that to actually happen. And I can't imagine they'd get almost anything done before that occurs. Like, I think that you would have to be in a very special place in the solar system to be at the exact right temperature where your body could sort of break itself down without killing the bacteria. But I don't know. It's interesting to think about that kind of thing. And you're right about the moon situation. It's kind of a weird one.
Yeah. It would be really interesting to, you know what? If you want to have your body be launched into Jupiter, that's great. I want them to dig a hole on the moon and bury me.
Just recently, sadly, there was an attempt to land a spacecraft on the moon called Peregrine, and there were some cremated remains of various individuals in Peregrine, and a bad thing happened at launch, and it missed the moon and came back and crashed on Earth. But they were cremated remains, so I guess it wouldn't really be the same kind of thing, because that's not really going to be something that breaks down, I suppose. But
see, that would be my luck.
Yeah, you'd miss the moon and you just, shoot for the moon. And if you miss, you might just come back and crash.
Yeah, you crash back on Earth.
And then we're right back to where we started at the beginning, where we were talking about re-entry burning up.
Yeah. It was nice and cyclical, this one.
Yeah.
But at that point, you've already been cremated, so it kind of feels like a sunk cost.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, you can't win them all, Jeremiah.
Mm-hmm.
So let us know, listeners, would mummies on the moon be bigger than mummies on Mars? If you If you have any thoughts on that or anything else we actually talked about in this episode, you can email us at feedback@vaguelyscientific.com, or you can comment on our blog, or you can like us on Facebook, or you can tweet @vaguelysci. Hey, Jim, where do we get all these wacky questions?
Well, if you, the listener, have a question that needs to be answered in a vaguely scientific manner, please email us at questions@vaguelyscientific.com. If you want to get our episodes the minute that they're released, you can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcast. I don't know what's going on with Google right now. So, I don't know, Spotify. We're on Spotify. We've been on Spotify since day one. So go and, I'll just replace that section in my notes with Spotify because I know that exists. But we're also anywhere else that cool podcasts hang out.
Is that day one of Spotify or day one of Vaguely Scientific?
Day one of Vaguely Scientific.
The latter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No, we founded Spotify, Jeremiah.
I own Spotify. It's, no, if I owned Spotify, they could really launch me into Jupiter and I'd be, anyway.
Unless they pay you the amount that they pay their artists. I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's funny because it's tragic.
It's tragic because it's tragic.
Yeah, that too. Subscribing on those services and leaving feedback really helps us out. But the most important thing you can do is tell your friends.
Yeah, tell all of your friends we're still doing this and they should all listen.
Yeah. Our vaguely musical intro was composed by Anthony Pizzelli, and don't forget to check out our merch store over at vaguelyscientific.threadless.com. It's going to be spring here in a couple days. You got to get your nice spring t-shirts. Maybe a hoodie. I don't know. I guess it's not going to be warm for a bit yet, unless you're in the southern hemisphere, in which case it's going to be fall, in which case it is good hoodie weather. Go buy a hoodie.
I don't know. It was in the 60s today here.
That's true. It's not going to be in the 60s tomorrow. I know that.
So thank you to Jeremiah for being our guest this week.
Yes, thank you. And I would like to come back and have my previous contributions also acknowledged.
Yeah, we will definitely have you on a second time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll acknowledge this episode. It was a good episode.
For Vaguely Scientific, I am Derek.
I'm Jim.
And I'm fed up.
Strike 3, we're out.
Toodaloo, everyone.
Because the earlier part was about baseball, so it was called.
I remember I was here, and I've been here before.
Wait, what's the earlier part about baseball?
Oh,
that's right, because I said Steve Jobs.
Happy birthday to Jeremiah's mom was the thing. I was like, oh, we should have had that recorded. Yeah. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all.
None of this matters.
Happy birthday today, the day of recording, to my mom, Jeremiah, as one of you.
As Jim said. And if Jim happens to go missing after recording this, you'll all know who is responsible.
Yes, it was Jeremiah because we doxed her real government name.
Okay.